Hey, do you want to come over and make a pot of tea, bring your favorite crystals? We could talk about our birth charts, spirits, the latest house spells we've been doing. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm that witch next door. Hey, neighbor. Welcome to another episode of That Witch Podcast. If this is your very first time here, hi, I'm Danny. I'm That Witch Next Door, and I'm your host here, your guide, your mentor, your spiritual bestie, if you will, in all things modern witchcraft and cosmic living. Today we have a bit of a discussion episode. My take on Coven work versus solitary work in witchcraft. So, first of all, we'll just start out by saying there is no one right or wrong way. It is not automatically better to practice solitary witchcraft or vice versa, that it's better to perform group witchcraft in a coven. There is a purpose for each. When I was very first starting out learning witchcraft and the different branches and different ways that people were already practicing modern or neo-paganism, different practices and traditions that these groups or these people said that they were inspired by and were emulating or taking that inspiration from. There was mixed messaging out there. There's some mixed signals out there for sure. On one hand, there is a benefit to group work. On the other hand, in modern witchcraft, in the current modern trends, there is definitely more of a pull or an influence or kind of like a collective leaning toward solitary work. And this is very valid for its own reason as well. So let's kind of talk about the pros and the cons here. So doing group work means multiple individuals coming together and performing a unified or cohesive task or project or spell or ritual. More hands on deck, more energy being offered. The benefits that come along with this are kind of obvious. So, people say that group spells or group rituals can have the most profound effects or experiences. I don't think it's necessary black and white one way or another. I don't necessarily think that it's like automatically better and more powerful if you have more hands on deck, because you have to take other people's free thinking and free will into consideration, things that are completely beyond your control. And then on the flip side of that, solitary work, depending on what you're doing, can be very limiting or can be very, very energetically draining. And so when you do have multiple people, you're all kind of sharing in shouldering the energetic responsibilities. So there's ups and downs to both. We can't have this conversation fully without touching on some ethics here, however. So in the rise of modern witchcraft in the 21st century, the 20th and 21st century, okay, so 1900s and forward, this is the age of Wicca and neo-paganism. Many traditions and practices within those umbrellas, some of those traditions and practices were adopted and carried out were very, very unethical. So we have the topic of Aleister Crowley, for example, and Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner is not as controversial in the witchcraft community as Aleister Crowley is. But Gerald Gardner, also known as like the father of Wicca, is still what I would consider to be a controversial key player here. We cannot talk about modern history of witchcraft now and a lot of how we practice a lot of our new modern traditions without talking about Crowley. He had a hand in so many different pots. He was, if you can like sit as far outside of your human judgment as possible and try to look at Aleister Crowley's life in as neutral, emotionally neutral of a way as possible, just on the surface, this is a very, very fascinating kind of out there dude. Who I think, and this is my own personal inference of, reading about him. I think that he was mainly self-motivated. I think that a lot of what Crowley was doing was out of either gaining for like, that might be gaining in like monetary wealth or like gaining in legacy or fame. I also think that one thing that Crowley just liked gaining and liked feeding was his own natural curiosity. I think that there was this like never ending hunger and thirst for like pushing the envelope, going even further, asking the next question, going another step. There is a lot in Crowley's like just nature and the way that he went about things that to me, I'm like, I don't think that he was necessarily like out to harm as many people as possible. I don't think that that was his goal. I also don't think that his goal was to like help as many people as possible either. I don't think that helping or hindering people was that much of his goal. I think that a lot of his goal was and motivations were rooted in like carnal curiosity. And I think the more he learned about ancient practices and different spiritual beliefs, the more that he was motivated to just push the envelopes of those things and ask further about them. Now, because that was his main goal, the way he went about things could be wildly unethical, not just by our today's standards, but even by back then, because there's a lot of stuff where you look back and you're like, you have to take into consideration the time period it was in. Even if you're taking into consideration the time period it was in. Crowley did some fucking outlandish stuff that was definitely wildly unethical. Definitely did a fuck ton of cultural appropriation, okay? Now, why does all of this matter, Danny, in the conversation of coven work versus solitary work? Because when we are all practicing magic and spirituality with each other, we are bringing our personal views, personal beliefs, our own personal context, our own personal ethics to the table. In our energetics, in our natural energetic participation. You are taking in that of someone else's. They're bringing all of that energy embedded in their ethics, their beliefs, their philosophies, their views. All of that is infused in their energy, and they're going to be bringing their energy and contributing it to this ritual or this spell. That matters. That matters. Who you're playing with matters, okay? Ethics matter. And honestly, we could go on and on about like ethics alone. This is something that I explored in depth with the wonderful Jenny SRP. There is a previous episode that I'll make sure to link in the show notes of this one. Jenny and I both went in depth into the ethics of the spiritual industry, and I think that it provides either great context for this episode or is at least like a nice handy companion to this episode, because these concepts are definitely interlinked. But you do need to take your ethics and morals and your conviction into consideration, and you have to take in the consideration of others if you're going to be spiritually practicing with them. This doesn't mean that you have to screen people to be like perfect specimens of human beings, but there does need to be alignment there on the main basic building blocks. There are certain fundamentals that if you're not aligned in, I would not recommend like performing spiritual work with one another. However, there is a difference between doing group work or participating in a ritual in a group and being part of a coven. So when I was first learning about witchcraft and I was finding and looking up beginner books, articles, teachers and instructors, you are going to come across a lot of the education about witchcraft, metaphysics, new age spirituality from 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. There was a lot more coven practicing during this time because witchcraft and spirituality was so much more closeted and had to be kept under so much, it was so taboo that it naturally people would find safe groups and group off. And this was where you could relate to and connect with others that believe the same thing as you, that participate in these same activities as you, and covens are formed. Covens, I mean, not to water down the definition too much, or should I say, at the risk of watering down the definition a little too much, covens are like a witchy club. Okay, it's like a club. A coven can be as fucking serious and formal as its members choose for it to be, or as casual and laid back and informal as its members choose it to be. There is no formal regulation or standards of what constitutes a coven versus what doesn't. You get to call yourself a coven if the groups in that coven also want it to be called that and want to identify as their group being a coven. This is more like a club, like I said. We're organized group. We're saying that we're a group. I don't necessarily want to full-blown say we're an organization, but these things do. They start out this way. The truth is that even the biggest dogmas, even the biggest denominations out there, all began somewhere with tiny groups. So anything can blow up. It's not wrong for us to be wary of things getting culty, okay? This is why we're having this conversation. This is why the ethics matters. This is why the conversation of philosophies and personal beliefs and your own conviction matters. Being solid in that, knowing that about yourself is going to be a marker for, yes, I enjoy sharing this part of my life with this person or these group of people, versus no, this does not feel safe or this feels misaligned. So it's really easy in the witchcraft industry to point out toxic Christian groups because many people have crossed paths with one or participated or been subject to the abuse or exploitation of one. It's very common. I want you to recognize that the bad reputation of witches and like unethical witchcraft behavior and choices and practices, a lot of those stories and stereotypes came from covens that really eventually turned into or were at its core at all times a cult. How would we what is the definition of a cult? Let's see. How do we define a cult? A religion or a religious sect generally considered to be extremist or false, with its followers often living in an unconventional manner under the guidance of an authoritarian, charismatic leader. It also says a cult can be the followers, it's also referring to just the followers of that religion or sect. And a cult can also simply be a system or community of religious worship and ritual. So this can be a very, very broad term. For our intents and purposes, we are using the term cult to define and label extremist, harmful groups. Okay. Covens can become cults. Cults can call themselves covens. And there have been harmful covens just as much as there's been harmful cults. I don't think most people actively participating in a cult knew they were in a cult. And again, we could go into this, could be a whole giant philosophical conversation that we could have together. But my point is that you need to get your shit on lock when it comes to your ethics, your values, your conviction. You need to think about how you believe magic should be used. You need to think about how you define magic. You need to think about how you define what is selfish gain or what is being done for the greater good. How do you define those terms? You have to have these conversations with yourself. And that means by exploring uncomfortable parts in yourself, exploring uncomfortable parts of history and stories and experiences shared by others, both on the sides of people that you agree with and people that you disagree with. Listen to the experiences on both sides. This is how we shape our ethics and our morals. If we don't do this, well, our magic is very erratic in the first place, but we are also not going to be any closer to knowing if we are a solitary practitioner or if we are being guided to doing more coven or group-like work. In our modern culture, especially with the way that witchcraft has trended now, with the help of social media and the influence of social media and the internet and all that has given way to, we don't have such a like a black and white decision that we have to make. We have way more gray area that we can explore here. It doesn't have to be so like, I am a solitary practitioner or I am part of a coven. This can be like something where nowadays you can say, right now, I do a lot of my practicing on my own, but I am interested in and actively trying to build my witchcraft community. And just because you're building community in witchcraft does not mean that you're forming a coven. Again, this is another little boundary definition. Having and being a part of witchy spiritual community does not mean that you're part of a coven. Once in a while, in like a cute, kitschy way, I'll like refer to us in like a quirky way, and that witch school is like, oh, our little coven. I purposefully don't do this in any type of formal way at all because I want that witch schools community to be much, much broader than that. If people meet each other within that witch school community and get close enough that they want to organize their own group and call themselves a little coven, that can spin off and happen on its own organically. I personally, as a platform and community host, however, like I do not draw any formal boundaries or standards around our community that says like we here in that witch school, we agree to be part of this coven and this is how we each agree to use our magic or whatever. It's way more broad than that. how you use your magic, how you view it, so much of that is up to you and each individual person in my community and in my school. My community has guidelines for safety and for sanctity purposes. If you don't abide by those guidelines, you inhibit our safety and sanctity of our school, so you can't be a part of that community. But this is a different conversation than the people that I'm actively practicing group rituals with. I will host in that witch school group events like shadow work group, where we are coming together as a group. We're each individually bringing our own unique healing journey with us by participating. um, I give collective direction and insight based on the astrology going on at that time. And then each individual can infer that and resonate with that information, however it best lands and is used for them and their unique individual healing journey. And then if they want to utilize the safe space and the support of the group by talking about their inner healing journey and saying, this is what I've been going through. When Danny was talking about this astrology, I really thought about this for myself. And this is something I'm trying to work on and let go of. I'm participating in the group structure and setting here. I'm getting support from the group, but we're not participating in this active collective group ritual with one unified collective outcome, the way that a coven might gather under the equinox and maybe they come together and make a collaborative feast. Maybe they do a ritual that they all do in step, in tandem together because they crafted it together and they are going to execute it together. And there's this group goal or group objective with that ritual. This is a little bit more of what it looks like within a coven. You look at how you practice your spells and rituals as a solitary witch. Just imagine that instead you wrote that with a few other friends or practitioners and you all came up with that spell and ritual together. You all brought your tools, you all used them, you all spoke the words, you all shared, etc., etc. Do you see a little bit of the difference? There's participating as a solitary practitioner in a group, safe, sacred, spiritual setting. And then there's a group acting as one unit and doing a spiritual ritual together. That is a coven versus a solitary practitioner participating in a group setting. You have to explore these concepts and you have to decide what fits best for you given the nature of and the season that you are in your life. Covens are not inherently evil and wrong. And people have the misgivings about them that they do for a reason. Exploring those reasons, peeling back the layers on them, and looking at how this sits with you and what feels right for you. That's how you discover if you work best right now as a solitary witch, or if maybe you are feeling called to creating a coven. You might find that in your beginnings and your developing of your witchcraft practice, that you have a couple of friends that it just so happens are embarking in their own yet similar journey as well. And you might find that the more and more that you share with each other, the more that you are feeling called to, we are this coven. We want to participate in these group rituals with each other. There are just as many, if not way more, beautiful, powerful experiences others can share about their coven experiences and stories. Yes, there are bad seeds and rotten apples that have been able to spoiled the reputation of and our associations with different parts of our life and experiences, including witchcraft and coven and group work. But they are not inherently evil. And that being said, solitary practicing is not inherently safe. Just because you're practicing alone does not automatically mean you're safe. Your energetic basics and boundaries, all of these ethics and moralities and values and beliefs that we've been talking about, these still play just as big a role whether you are a solitary practitioner or a practitioner within a coven. But to anybody that's wondering if one is more legit than the other, or if you're doing it wrong because you have never been part of a coven, or those are myths. I think that there's these old associations that come from like the early days of the beginnings of neo-paganism and modern Wicca that have bled into modern magic and given these misgivings like, oh, if we do it this way, it's not real. And the truth is that witchcraft itself is this organic entity that's always developing, always blossoming, always evolving. And it's really based in our human ethics. So you need to get comfortable with reflecting about that for yourself. Pay attention to how you react to certain current events, moral issues out in the world, things that strike a chord of morality with you. Look at those types of things. Be willing to do that inner self-reflection. Don't be afraid to say yes to something that feels aligned, even if it's a little unknown and scary. And don't, just on the same coin, different side, also don't be afraid to say no, that just because on the surface this looks like it should fit me and this other person or me and this group, but there's just something that I don't feel quite right about and I don't want to say yes to participating with those people. That is just as valid. So I think that in our paths as developing witches, we will go through seasons where we are practicing alone and where we practice with others. And it is up to us to continue kind of reflecting throughout those experiences what we are constantly learning, what's fitting for us, what's not fitting for us. You'll find that there are people that come into your life for a reason, but just a season, and then you're meant to move on from them. There are people in your life that you'll learn things about and you'll adopt those things and embrace them as part of your craft, but you won't necessarily work with those people themselves anymore. Your life will carry you in two different directions. So this, at the end of the day, really is a conversation about our own personal values and morals and ethics, which is exactly why I'm going to link that episode for you. But it's something that I think stirs a lot of people up, and really, truly, there is no one right or wrong way, and there is no one dangerous way and one safe way. You have to really get clear with your own values first in order to even be able to say what feels right or feels wrong, whether you're alone or with a group of people. But if you have any questions that kind of spark from this, if you have had a situation, a scenario, an experience that you've been through that has shaped how you kind of feel about this, or if you have any questions about it, I would love to hear from you. You can go to thatwitchnextdoor.com/conjurethatwitch and share your experience or question with me for a chance to be shared and shouted out on That Witch podcast in a future episode. Thank you, my friend, for exploring every corner of witchcraft and magic with me. I love these discussions with you. You are wonderful. And I cannot wait for many, many more, my friend. I hope that you are out there having lots of fun, making sure that you stay safe, and of course, stay magical. If you are a big fan of That Witch podcast and everything we do here in our witchy neighborhood, I would be so grateful if you could head over and give us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This is something that helps boost our reach for the show, and it lets so many others know that what they're getting here at That Witch podcast is really, really good quality stuff. It only takes a couple of minutes and it's totally free, and it makes a huge, huge difference from one witch to another. Thank you so much for your support, neighbor.